queria cumprimentar todos neste momento em que se prepara a Declaração de Lisboa. É um novo ciclo histórico na reflexão sobre um tema fundamental. E como estou entre especialistas, eu dispenso-me de falar dos dados de envelhecimento. Querendo falar de Portugal, eu diria que o envelhecimento vai traduzir-se provavelmente numa passagem de 20% para 26% de portugueses com mais de 65 anos em 15 anos. Em 15 anos. E que esta evolução está exponencial. Não está a infletir, está a acelerar. E é perante ela que devemos refletir sobre os desafios do tema de hoje. Como disse muito bem o Sr. Ministro, que saúde por esta iniciativa. A sustainable society for all ages, realizing the potential of living together. Which means three dimensions, different dimensions, of tackling this problem. The first one is exactly to understand we are living a change in patterns, in classic patterns of living. I used to say to my students in the first class every year, I am a university professor, law professor, I used to tell them, I was born at the time when, coming to university, the idea was having the same profession all over our life, living where my family lived, and in a way, accepting the world the way it used to be in the 60s, beginning of the 60s and then the 70s, slow in its demographic and social evolution. It changed. Now, your task, I tell them, all of them, mostly women, not men, as it used to be when I was young. Now, your task is to have so many activities and professions all over your life. You cannot imagine how many, all over the world, all over the world. And accept that what is stable is change. And must be ready to face change, which means knowing how to reason and solve problems in a changing world, knowing how to communicate in a changing world, and how to see and how to know what is happening in this world, where and when. Where and when. And then have principles, your values. You must have your values to face all those challenges. Your values are not necessarily mine. They are yours. Well, this change was treated in a book that is called Man, God, from an Israeli professor that tells us, just imagine that by the end of this century, 21st century, we're living 150 years. Of course, that's utopia. Well, but not 150 years, but 110, 105. These changes our way of seeing the world. Because then, well, living with someone or getting married at the age of 20 or 30 means living for 8 years with the same person in the same family. Means that you'll be having professions changing at a speed you cannot imagine. I still recall at the time of my father, one used to ask, well, how long was it in that profession? 30 years. Well, that's very good. That means that it's someone trustable, stable. Now, if you just think today, and you look at someone having the same profession for 30 years, one will say, oh, he lacks imagination. He lacks adventurous spirit. It's someone that is not courageous enough to face new challenges. So, the whole way of understanding our lifetime changes. Well, at first, in most developed countries, then in developing countries, then all over the world. It's inevitable. The second dimension is that we must have the perception of this. Not us, but everyone. Not us. Sometimes we forget, we politicians, we professors, we people dealing with opinion leaders, that we represent a small minority in our people. The majority of the people has a slow cultural evolution dealing with these changes. Still believes that things won't change so much and so quickly. It won't happen. And then they discover it happened. And this broad perception, it's one challenge. Realizing the potential of living together. Realize is understand, is perceive, is introducing in our way of living this new reality. And then acting, and then acting. And acting means everything. Everything. Of course, it means health care for those people living longer. Of course, it means social security for those people living longer. And sustainability in healthcare systems and in social security systems. But much more than that, it means quality in living. It means human dignity. It means not an economic and financial approach, but a cultural approach, a human approach. And that makes a difference. I mean, we think one must rediscover new activities at the age of, well, my age, 68, almost 69. I've discovered it for a while, for a couple of years. Well, with the help of the Portuguese people, of course. Not on myself, because they voted. Otherwise, it would be impossible. But then at the age of 70, at the age of 75, 80, 85, 90, I must admit that I see more women widows than men. But even so, I mean, those are new challenges. What to do, how to do, what kind of activities. And what kind of quality of living for those people. And the way the community accepts them. Because we live in societies that get egoistic. And in period of crisis, and last time you met, it was in a period of crisis in Warsaw. So with Europe and the world facing economic and financial crisis, it was hard to speak of the problem of elderly people. I even spoke in Portugal of a cleavage one could notice between younger generations and older generations, at least in Portugal. Young people, my students, blaming the older generation, saying, well, we received an heritage we didn't deserve. It was your fault. And then the older generation say, you want us to live in a ghetto. He wants us to disappear from your life and from social life because we are getting too old. And you want quicker to occupy all the places. At the age of 20, 30, 40. Well, and even the way people express themselves, for instance, in Portugal, older generations, they don't read too much. They see TV, but not cable TV, generalist TV. And the younger generations, different. It's net, it's internet. They do read a little. Well, but and they react on real time. The reaction of older people is slower, even concerning the way they deal with the reality. They see it through different media, and their perception is very, very different. We must always make the bridge between these different generations. An older one that is older and older, getting older, a younger one that is entering the labor market, wanting to work and to be present in culture, society, economy, politics, earlier than ever. Earlier than ever. And then there is a middle class generation, or a couple of generations in between, that are making that bridge. Well, so in a sense, it's quite a challenge, the one you have to face. But that is the good news. For the moment being, the crisis is over. I mean, the crisis, it was 5 years ago. And that's good news. Although we must be careful, because we know that today economic cycles are shorter. You don't have cycles of 10 years of growth, economic growth and employment. No, it's over. But if you have 5 years, 3, 4, 5 years, that's already good news. For the next 5 years, apparently, Europe is improving and the world is improving. Which means that this time the Declaration of Lisbon could be a little bit more optimistic. More optimistic. Well, as anything that happens in Lisbon and in Portugal. We are a very optimistic country. That's why we left 500 years ago to try to discover new continents and new cultures and civilizations. That's why we are so open-minded concerning refugees and migrations. Because our people is a people of migration. We are everywhere in the world. And this ecumenical way of being explains why you are feeling so happy being in Portugal, and we are feeling so happy for receiving you here. Well, but, and then, of course, a final word. Today, I don't know if you know it, but perhaps you know it, it's the Alzheimer's disease day. Did you know it? If you didn't, now you know it. Just after this meeting, I'm going to visit one of the centers for those patients. And when I speak of Alzheimer's disease, I'm speaking of one of the diseases of elderly people. There are several chronic diseases. And that's a new challenge also, when one speaks of quality. Mental diseases are of all ages, but mostly of those that live longer. So, today we celebrate your presence here, but we celebrate this year also a fact. 20 years ago, there was a pact, a protocol signed by the Portuguese state and different non-governmental organizations, NGOs, and social institutions. It was signed 20 years ago. It was Prime Minister António Guterres, that nowadays is Secretary General of the United Nations. The world is small. One is starting in Portugal, well, and public politics and social politics, and then becomes Secretary General of the United Nations. Well, and so I must recognize and thank the work, not of the state, but of those institutions. Every day, every week, every month. The volunteer that really are doing their best And without them, the crisis we have lived would be different and much worse. And they are there in this subject, but not theoretically. They are there practically. So, thank you for coming. Of course, do think a little bit of how to finance anything you plan. But don't give the finance ministers too much power. They have already all the power of the world to balance their budgets, and I do understand it. Without a balanced budget, it's impossible to live. But then, try not to be too financial, too economical, too political. Try to be a little bit more social. You must be ministers for social affairs. Your fight is social. In every meeting of the Council of Ministers, whenever you need money, and the Minister of Finance will tell you there is no money. Yes, at least not the money you would like to have. That's your fight. Must be your fight. Someone must have this duty. Thank you for coming. Welcome to Portugal. I expect a very clever and courageous Lisbon Declaration for the next future. And when I think of it, I think as, of course, someone that is already 67, 68, worse than that, 68. I think of people that are even older than I am, but I think of all the Portuguese people and all the peoples all around the world that you represent. They deserve your worries, your work, and your courage. Thank you.